She'll explain it as we go to. Yes. You didn't get one?
Nancy got one.
Really up and down. Save the plate.
We've been there so long.
Feels like I'm serving dinner. That grape juice is so strong. He's not taking a collection. Okay, this is. Yeah, okay. Just let me see it. Nobody probably will see it. What's my husband's in the
Welcome. Welcome to this place. For this evening, it is home to all of us. We are hosts and guests to one another. So it was with the people whose lives were changed by Jesus' presence. He invited them to care for one another with a love that could not be hurried. He invited them and us to a depth of presence that says, in this moment, there is nothing more important than our connection with each other and with God. Put away your hurry and your worry and be right here. We will not always have one another. Hear this story from the last week of Jesus' life, of a moment that stripped everything away but the truth that these were final moments not to be missed. Come and find a quiet center, enter into God's rest. Come and be here as you enter to a time of bless.
Jesus was at Bethany, visiting the house of Simon, who had a skin disease. During dinner, a woman came in with a vase made of alabaster and containing very expensive perfume of pure nard. She broke open the vase and poured the perfume on his head. Some grew angry. They said to each other, "Why waste the perfume? This perfume could have been sold for almost a year's pay, and the money was given to the poor." and they scolded her. Jesus said, "Leave her alone. Why do you make trouble for her? She has done a good thing for me. You always have the poor with you, and whenever you want, you can do something good for them. But you won't always have me. She has done what she could. She has anointed my body ahead of the time for burial. I tell you the truth, that wherever the whole world the good news is announced, what she's done will also be told in memory of her."
Come and find the quiet center in the crowded lives beneath. Find the room for hope to enter. Find the frame where we are free. Clear the chaos and the clutter. Clear our eyes that we can see all the things that really matter. Be at peace and simply be. Those who journeyed with Jesus in his ministry gathered daily together to share food and drink to sustain them for their lives. But meals were so much more than just assuaging hunger and thirst. Time and time again, Jesus would invite so-called outsiders to eat with them, using meals as a way of demonstrating the attention we must give to one another. Whether or not we agree with each other, whether or not we feel comfortable with each other, whether or not we feel that there are many more important things to do with our time. He demonstrated that eating the bread of the earth and the fruit of the vine points us toward the right relationship, giving thanks to the Creator and giving time and attention to each other.
On the first day of the festival of unleavened bread, when the Passover lamb was sacrificed, the disciples said to Jesus, "What do you want us to prepare for you to eat the Passover meal?" He sent two of his disciples and said to them, "Go into the city. A man carrying a water jar will meet you. Follow him. Wherever he enters, say to the owner of the house, 'The teacher asks, where is my guest room where I can eat the Passover meal with my disciples?' He will show you a large room upstairs already furnished. Prepare for us there." The disciples left, came into the city, found everything just as he had told them, and they prepared the Passover meal. That evening, Jesus arrived with the 12.
Upon entering the sanctuary tonight, you were provided with a small plate with bread and a 3-filled cup of juice. We gather tonight as the disciples did in the first century to commune together, to take bread and drink together as a community. Now you will repeat after me a short phrase. Every time I say, "It takes time," you will say, "It takes time. It takes time. It takes time." Ah, you got that right. So yes, yes. You have your small plate, and on it is bread and a pre-filled cup of juice. It takes time.
It takes time.
You sow seeds and tend them while they grow.
So now I want you to take the bread and eat it. We eat it remembering all the people it took to make the bread ready for us tonight. Remember, it takes time.
It takes time.
For grain and grape to ripen and bring forth their fullness. It takes time.
It takes time.
So now I want you to take your little juice cup and open it.
Open it. Okay, drink it.
Can you imagine all the people and time it took to make this little small packaged juice cup? Can you imagine that? Let's drink. It takes time.
It takes time.
To harvest and prepare that which will sustain.
We need each other. We are interdependent. Acknowledging we are not self-sufficient. Acknowledging we can't live in this world alone or by ourselves. Acknowledging that we don't all have it all together. It takes time.
It takes time.
It takes time.
And so, for the seeds of love tended,
For the ripening of relationship.
For the harvesting and preparing of the loving community.
We give thanks and praise. And all God's people said, amen.
Amen.
Tonight we gather to remember Jesus' entire ministry and remember the ways we have learned how to connect with an unhurried God these past 6 weeks. Because this is Holy Week, we remember that the last meal Jesus had with his disciples was good, but contained some unusual moments. The blessing over the bread and cup had elicited some extra words from Jesus. The bread, Jesus said, was his body broken for us, and the cup was his blood poured out as a sign of the new covenant. And to remember him and these words over their meals after he was no longer with them. This had to cast a strange field over the gathering. And Jesus gave his final mandate, the Maundy, to love one another as Jesus has loved them. But those words weren't the only indication that this was a unique moment. Jesus also insisted on washing the disciples' feet, a practice usually reserved for servants.
Jesus and his disciples were sharing the evening meal. The devil had already provoked Judas, Simon Iscariot's son, to betray Jesus. Jesus knew the Father had given everything into his hands, and that he had come from God and was returning to God. So he got up from the table, took off his robes, and picking up a linen towel, he tied it around his waist. Then he poured water into a wash basin and began to wash the disciples' feet, drying them with the towel he was wearing. When Jesus came to Simon Peter, Peter said to him, "Lord, are you going to wash my feet?" Jesus replied, "You don't understand what I'm doing now, but you will understand later." "No," Peter said, "you will never wash my feet." And Jesus replied, "Unless I wash you, you won't have a place with me."
Making space for Jesus to have a place in your life requires a washing away of anything that may get in the way. Water is a basic essential for life. We remember that both in Jesus' baptism and in this act of washing feet, he established that no one is greater than another. Even Jesus went through a ritual of cleansing and renewing at the beginning of his ministry and at the end. His washing of his disciples' feet was a profound act done to impress upon us the importance of tending with love to each other. Self-care and serving others go hand in hand. But this is the last meal, and it did contain some unusual moments.
That evening, Jesus and the 12 arrived and went into the upper room, and each reclined around the table, leaning upon an elbow as he ate.
I tell you in absolute sincerity, one of you eating with me tonight is going to betray me.
The 12 were upset. They looked around at each other.
Lord, it's not I, is it? Lord, it's not I. It's not me, is it? Lord, it's not I, is it?
It is one of you, the 12, one of you who is dipping your bread in the same dish that I am.
The Son of Man goes to his fate that has already been predicted in the scriptures. But still, it will be terrible for the one who betrays him. It would have been better for him if he had never been born.
all of you will desert me tonight. It was written by Zechariah, I will strike the shepherd, and the sheep will scatter. But when I am raised up, I will go ahead of you to Galilee.
It doesn't matter who else turns his back on you, I will never desert you.
Peter, mark my words. This very night before the cock crows thrice, you will have denied me 3 times.
No, teacher, even if it means that I have to die with you.
All the
I'll
other
never deny
disciples. Go ahead. Yeah? All the other disciples said similar things. Go again. All the other disciples said similar things. They came at length to a garden called Gethsemane.
Stay here. I'm going a little further to pray and to think.
He took Peter, James, and John with him, and as they left the larger group behind, he became distressed and filled with sorrow.
My heart is so heavy. I feel as if I could die. Wait here for me and stay awake to keep watch.
He walked on a little farther. Then he threw himself on the ground and prayed for deliverance from what was about to come.
Abba, Father, I know that anything is possible for you. Please take this cup away so I don't have to drink from it. But whatever happens, let your will be done, not mine.
He got up, went back to the 3, and found them sleeping.
Simon, are you sleeping? Could you wait with me for just an hour? Stay awake and pray that you aren't led into a trial of your own. It's true, even when the spirit is willing, the body can betray it.
He went away again, and he prayed again, the same prayer as before, pleading with God, but surrendering to his will. He came back and found the 3 asleep, and when he woke them, they didn't know what to say to him. After he had gone away and prayed for a 3rd time, he returned to find them slumbering.
Again? Still sleeping? And getting a good rest? Well, that's enough sleep. The time has come. The Son of Man is betrayed into the hands of sinners.
Before he had finished talking, Judas, one of the 12, approached with a large group of people, agents of the chief priests, scribes and elders in Jerusalem, armed with swords and clubs. The signal they had arranged was a kiss. "Watch to see whom I kiss. He's the one," Judas had told them. "Arrest him and take him into secure custody." As soon as they arrived, Judas stepped forward.
My teacher.
Immediately, the soldiers grabbed Jesus and took him into custody. Now, one of the disciples, standing close by, drew his sword and swung, cutting off the ear of a slave of Caiaphas, the high priest.
Am I a thief or a bandit that you have to come to me armed with swords and clubs to capture me? I sat teaching in the temple every day with you. You could have taken me at any time, but you never did. let the scriptures be fulfilled.
They led Jesus off to see the high priest, who had gathered a council of religious and civic leaders, scribes, chief priests, and elders, to hear the evidence and render some decision regarding Jesus. Peter followed at a safe distance all the way into the courtyard of the high priest, and he sat down with the guards to warm himself at their fire. He hoped no one would notice. The chief priests and other religious leaders called for witnesses against Jesus so they could execute him, but things didn't turn out the way they had planned. There were plenty of people willing to get up and accuse Jesus falsely, distorting what Jesus had said or done, but their testimonies disagreed with each other, and the leaders were left with nothing. Some gave the following distorted testimony.
We heard him say, "I will destroy this temple that has been made by human hands, and in 3 days I will build another that is not made by human hands."
But even here, the witnesses could not agree on exactly what he had said. The high priest stood up and turned to Jesus.
Do you have anything to say in your own defense? What do you think of what all these people have said about you?
But Jesus held his peace and didn't say a word.
Are you God's anointed, the liberating King, the Son of the Blessed One?
I am. One day you will see the Son of Man sitting at his right hand in the place of honor and power, and coming in the clouds of heaven.
Then the high priest tore his clothes.
What else do we need to hear? You have heard the blasphemy from his own lips. What do you have to say about that?
The verdict was unanimous. Jesus was guilty of a capital crime. So the people began to humiliate him. Some even spat on him. Then he was blindfolded, and they slapped and punched him.
Come on, prophet. Prophecy for us. Tell us who just hit you.
Then the guards took him, beating him as they did so. While Peter was waiting by the fire outside, one of the servant girls of the high priest saw him.
You were one of those men with Jesus of Nazareth.
Woman, I don't know what you're talking about.
He left the fire, and as he went out into the gateway, a cock crowed. The servant girl saw him again.
Hey, this is one of them. One of those who followed Jesus.
No, I'm not one of them.
A little later, some of the other bystanders turned to Peter.
Surely you're one of them. You're a Galilean. We can tell by your accent.
And then he swore an oath that if he wasn't telling the truth, that he would be cursed.
Listen, I don't even know the man you're talking about.
And as he said this, a cock crowed a second time, and Peter remembered what Jesus had told him. Before the cock crows twice, you will have denied me 3 times. He began to weep. The soldiers took him into the headquarters of the governor, and the rest of the soldiers in the detachment gathered there, hundreds of them. They put a purple robe on him and made a crown of thorns that they forced onto his head. And they began to cry out in mock salute.
Hail to the King of the Jews!
And they beat him on the head with a reed, spat upon him, and knelt down as if to honor him. When they had finished mocking him, they stripped off his purple robe and put his own clothes back on him. Then they took him away to be executed. Along the way, they met a man from Cyrene, Simon, the father of Rufus and Alexander, who was coming in from the fields, and they ordered him to carry the heavy crossbar of the cross. And so they came at last to the execution site, a hill called Golgotha, which means the place of a skull. The soldiers offered Jesus wine mixed with myrrh to dull his pain, but he refused it. And so they crucified him, divided up his clothes, and cast lots, an ancient equivalent of rolling dice, to see who would keep the clothes they had stripped from him. His crucifixion began about 9 o'clock in the morning. Over his head hung a sign that indicated the charge for which he was being crucified. It read, "The King of the Jews." On either side of him were 2 insurgents who also had received the death penalty. And the Hebrew scripture was completed that said he was considered just another criminal. Those passing by on their way into or out of Jerusalem insulted and ridiculed him.
So, you're the one who was going to destroy the temple and rebuild it in 3 days? Well, if you're so powerful, then why don't you rescue yourself? Come on down from that cross.
He rescued others, but he can't rescue himself. Let the anointed, the King of Israel, come down from the cross now, and we will see it and believe.
Even the insurgents who were being crucified next to him taunted him and reviled him. At noon, the day suddenly darkened for 3 hours across the entire land. Sometime around 3 o'clock, Jesus called out in a loud voice,
Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani.
Jesus was speaking as in the Psalms, my God, why have you turned your back on me?" Some of those standing nearby misunderstood him.
Hey, he's calling for Elijah.
One of them filled a sponge with wine that had turned to vinegar and lifted it to Jesus' lips on a stick so he could drink.
Let's see if Elijah will come to take him down.
Then Jesus cried out with a loud voice, and he took his last breath. At that moment, the curtain in the temple was torn in two from top to bottom.
Surely this man was truly the Son of God.
down the elevator? You going down the elevator?
Oh, yeah, I am.
Thank you very much. Thank you for putting them all up in the show. I assume somebody didn't unmute the
Yeah, but the first part, I don't know. I think he was just Chuck. But,
He was holding it.
yeah, that's it. I think he, after he can hear his voice from the speakers, he's like, oh, whatever. Yeah, he's sorry. There's all the mic.
Yes. Okay. That's it. Great. Thank you very much.
Oh, I turned it down because I knew Reverend Pastor Alberta. It's real easy to tell. 70-something is Pastor Alberta. It's a dead giveaway. Oh, that was beautiful. I will. Yeah, I gotta watch out. It's these glasses. Just be careful on this. I know, because of the glasses. Did you get new glasses?
He did.
Where do the clipboards go? Oh, I had to from the audience. No, I left them in the box. Oh, she, I see Gail found it. Yes, the box for the, are right here for the lights. The lights going here. And I don't know where, oh, those are for the lights. For the lights. Don't turn them off yet, I'm still working on this. Who turned the lights off? Oh. How do you get these on? Oh, I have to go back outside. Let me go. Then you go back. Yeah, I have to lock it. It's from the outside. You have to dark it. Okay, I'll see that. Here you go. They started doing it. Here, Harriet. Harriet, what? Oh, okay. Okay. Let me go and turn out the. They're plugged in from the outside. I'll do that. You'll do that? Okay. I think we got it. She's going to go out back to turn the unplug the
I know.
Stained glass.
I saw
And
it
we've
there.
already turned down
Wow,
several
where's she at?
pieces.
She made one. Who's it by? Yeah, yeah. So she's normal.
For what?
She doesn't want it to be.
Oh, doors?
It's normal.
And they're plugged from outside.
I mean, I could text her, but she doesn't have a phone, so why would it?
That's right, you talk. We have to talk to buildings and grounds about that. The chairs go back in the care covers room now?
I would ask Alberta, I don't know anything about it, I'm just fixing to eat. I'm just the eat person.
I don't think anything's going by.
We don't need these up here for
The lights are on, so I'm just gonna wait.
I would say